Thank you all so much for having me here. That sounds way more complicated than what I feel like I actually do, but yeah, I hope to show you today that what the research that we've done I find fascinating, and I hope that you do too. I mean, it's a fun topic to talk about taste as it relates to wine and spirits, and we'll get into all of that. But I want to kind of give you a background of how I got into it in the first place, sort of what we've done with it, and then what the future hopefully looks like and some of the directions that we're headed. And so, as a background, when I was in Denver, I had the opportunity to work in a lab that specializes in taste and smell research. And so they really focused in the rat model. And so there wasn't a lot of translational studies. And that's where, I'm not going to try to bore you too much with the actual science of it, but I think it gives a good background. But that lab was one of the labs that was able to discover these certain receptors. So when he talks about, or when he gave the introduction on the different types of tastes that we have, sweet, salt, bitter, sour, and umami are our 5 primary tastes. And so umami is the one that kind of confuses people. Umami is really like a savory taste. It really enhances flavor. It's often associated with MSG. Those are the 5 primary tastes. And so that lab in Colorado had really worked in the rat model looking at T2Rs, which are a bitter receptor. And so the reason that is really fascinating to me is T2Rs are not only located in your mouth, so they really serve 2 roles. So it's a bitter taste receptor, so yes, in your mouth and on your tongue and on your palate, they certainly influence taste, but they're actually throughout your entire respiratory system, and they have a really primary role in part of your immune response, specifically your innate immune response. And so if you take a step back, there's really 2 primary types of immunity. That's adaptive immunity, which most people sort of think of when they hear about immunity. That's like prior infections or basically vaccines are ways to stimulate your adaptive immune response so that the next time that you are exposed to something, you will recognize it and then fight it off. Where your innate immune response, I actually find really fascinating because it's really your initial barrier of defense. It's not nearly as complicated as your adaptive immune response, but because it's kind of rudimentary, it actually kind of goes across the spectrum. It's not isolated to one certain virus or bacteria. It actually can be helpful against all of them. And so I'll talk about why that's important. But this lab in Colorado had really studied these T2Rs, which are bitter taste receptors, in the rat model as they influence immunity. And so I had the opportunity to work in that lab when we were living in Colorado during residency. And some of these receptors had not been identified in humans, and so we had the idea, well, could we measure them? Could we figure out a way to biopsy, test for them, and then prove their existence in humans? And so during my time there, I was actually able to do that, not as a result of myself, but because it's an incredible lab. And so through that was really my initial moment in studying these type of receptors. And so when we were able to isolate them in humans, it opened up this whole avenue of study. And so flash forward, we moved back to Baton Rouge, and we had continued to study these receptors as they matter to upper respiratory infections like bacteria causing sinusitis. As he mentioned, most of my practice is sinus infections, chronic sinusitis, diseases of the nose. And so obviously part of that is recurrent infections. And so we had studied these receptors as they relate to inflammatory diseases and bacterial infections. Well, then COVID hit, and it obviously changed our entire world for the last 3 years. I will make the comment that there's not a lot of good that came out of COVID. It has been a tough 3 years that has affected all of us, but it certainly hyper-stimulated our research into this. And so it was during COVID where we had the idea that I know the way that these receptors work. They shouldn't be isolated to any certain disease. It should be that if something is a potential pathogen or a foreign body that you're exposed to, if you have high level of expression of these receptors, in theory, that should be potentially protective. And if you have low level of expression of these receptors, well, then you should be more at risk for getting the disease. And so early on in COVID, that was kind of the idea, and we started testing people like crazy. Well, I realize that research is not always the most exciting, or it can be a little nerdy. I don't think that you can find a nerdier topic than taste receptors, but they are fascinating, and here's why. So during that whole process, we basically said, okay, this is the one chance in my career, and honestly over the last, since the Spanish influenza, that we have a novel virus that we know nothing about. We started testing people just as fast as we could. And the beauty of research, or what I find fascinating, is if you have an idea, your goal should be to try to disprove it. That's why you set up trials. It's not to prove something, that's what the hypothesis is, and you should design a trial to try to disprove that. And so the first trial we did, the data actually was very compelling. Now, we were only testing people who were admitted in the hospital, and so that's obviously a completely biased study. But the data held up, and so then we said, okay, how should we do this in a way where we can measure these receptors? Because we knew a way to accurately measure them real time without having to send off genetics, so that you get a quick, inexpensive, easy answer, and then try to predict, does it actually show the course of illness? And so in our first big study that we published, we basically tested 2,000 subjects and tested them to prove that they didn't have COVID and that they previously had not had COVID. And then we did a taste test on them, measuring their current level of expression of these bitter taste receptors. And then in a subset, we did a genetic test to see how accurate that our measurement was, to prove that our test in real time actually did predict what their genetic makeup should say. We then followed them to see when they got COVID, if they got COVID, how severe their illness was, and it was pretty wild. Okay, so what the results showed, so we ended up publishing this study in the Journal of American Medical Association, or JAMA is kind of what it's better known as. But during the heart of COVID, we realized through this trial that only 5% of the population who contracted COVID were those with really high expression of these receptors. Then we looked at, of those requiring hospitalization, it still held out that 86% of those who required hospitalization were in the low expression group. And of the 14% who were not in the low expression group, they were in the middle group, showing moderate expression, but their average age was greater than 65 years of age. And the reason that's important is what our test is actually measuring, or was measuring with that one, is phenotypic expression. And so, to not bore you or talk over your head, what phenotypic expression means is that is your outward expression of your genetic makeup, right? So we inherit genes from our parents. I'll give you a good example. So brown hair, you inherit the genetic makeup for brown hair. By the time we're 80 years old, your hair may be gray. It does not mean that your genetic makeup has changed. It means that your phenotypic expression is no longer as strong as it was when you were 30 years of age. The same thing happens with these receptors. As we get older, they tend to decrease, which is part of the reason why your palate changes as you age through life, in addition to preference that you develop. But that middle group that had moderate expression, the average age was 65. That is a wear off of the receptors, so they're no longer as functional as they were. Well, that sparked a whole avenue of research. And so now the medical part, we continue to study these, and we have continued to do it to COVID, which is obviously kind of wearing down, fortunately, but now we've shown it to influenza, RSV. The point being is, it is measurement of your innate immune system, and so it's not specific to one virus. And so we've now worked on nasal sprays. Now, all of these in medicine, they require a long process, as they should, to get them through the FDA, because you don't want to release anything until it's fully proven. But we have gone through these processes of getting clearance through the FDA, and then now nasal sprays. The point of the nasal sprays are to stimulate the receptors, with the point being is, if you know that you're going to be exposed, if you're going to a wedding in cold and flu season, you have a nasal spray that's essentially going to stimulate your initial barrier of defense and help prevent infection. Not perfectly, but at least decrease your chances. Okay, I say all that to say, when all of that went out, it was great. And it's something we're very proud of because we're doing this research here in Baton Rouge. And that's something that admittedly I'm exceptionally biased about, but I have had the opportunity to train all over the world, in Colorado, in Australia. I've worked with University of Pennsylvania, a lot of kind of big name power academic centers. One frustration I have is that in meetings with these people, it's not that we're looked down on, but in Louisiana, we never have sort of played first fiddle in a lot of academic circles. And so the fact that we have been able to do this out of Baton Rouge is something that I think that we can all be really proud of. Okay, so when we published that in JAMA, National Geographic picked it up, Washington Post, it was covered worldwide. During that, I got an email from an editor of one of the big wine magazines, and he asked the question of, you use the term super taster. So that's kind of the old term for someone with high expression of one specific bitter receptor. So it's not a great term, but it is the term that's used. And so he asked me, he said, you use the term super taster. Is that a sommelier? Is that someone who really knows wine or has a better palate? And, it was one of the first times where I guess we thought, like, we now have the ability to measure taste receptors specifically for each person. I wonder if you actually could do something with that, as opposed to, we know that these taste receptors have kind of two roles: the immunity, which we just talked about, but also certainly influence taste. So if we have the ability to, on a real-time, measure them with greater than 95% accuracy, because that was what the study showed, is how accurate is our test in predicting the genetic makeup. And it basically showed greater than 95% accuracy. We can deliver a taste test that measures people's individual taste receptors. The point is, or what we started looking at is, could you take different products in the food and beverage space, figure out what the primary components of those products, and then match a test for the specific receptors that are going to be stimulated by those products, if that makes sense. You can't just do a generic test and it kind of tell you all the answers. So the example would be wine. So wine's a fun project to take on. It's complicated because there are millions of different brands out there. But it's a complicated field. It is a confusing field, meaning we all buy wine the same way. That's what we've learned through this project, is everyone walks into a store. If they don't know what they love, it's intimidating. They don't want to admit that they don't know how to talk the talk. And so you buy a label that's in your price point, and you hope it doesn't stink. That is how people buy wine. And so that was where this product seemed like it had such good applicability to the public. And so if we could take wine, we know that the primary components of wine are tannins, which is from the skin and the seed, but also from the barrel that it's aged in, whether it be American oak or French oak. But you also have residual sugar after the fermentation process. Well, that's going to be a different receptor. That's going to be a sweet receptor, which is T1R. So you have to figure out the specific bitter taste receptors that are stimulated on your tongue, in your palate, and the sweet receptors. You design a test to measure those specific receptors, and then you pair that with wine recommendations. That has been fun, okay? And something that obviously has gotten a lot of publicity. It's been in Forbes. It's obviously Good Morning America. The fact that, I grew up on a cotton farm in North Louisiana with near Trey or his grandparents, with 100 people total. The fact that I went to Good Morning America is wild. And so, it proves to me how great this is that we, in Louisiana, we take pride in our culture. We have great food, and that's something we can be proud of. But the ability to do it in a scientific way is what has just been incredible to me. And I think that, it's something that we all should be proud of. And so, where the future goes, obviously wine is not the end of it. Wine is just the one that has gotten the most publicity right now because it is available to the public. And so I will, in just a second, I'm going to steal Trey as a dummy to show, not as a dummy, as a guinea pig. Trey is certainly not a dummy, but as a guinea pig to show how easy they are. But basically, to show you these things, basically we have it down to where now it's a couple of litmus paper strips. You take it on an app, with the point being is it's measuring your taste receptors and it gives you real-time results. And then we've worked with different producers and retailers in the wine space, and it matches different varietals based on where it's grown, the barrel that it's aged in. And so it's become very specific, with the point being is it gives everyday people the power to talk the talk, to know what they like, as opposed to a world of intimidation. In addition to Good Morning America, the fact that I can take a test and it tell me that I like an old vine Zinfandel that's grown in Sonoma, aged in a French oak, like, that's crazy to me. But that's the point of it. If we can use the science to do that, to measure you specifically, it opens up so much. And so we've now started to work also on bourbon and coffee. There should be no product in the food and beverage space that we can't tackle, because since we have now figured out how to measure specific taste receptors, well, you can match that. And for me specifically, look, I'm totally biased, admittedly. But, I think if nothing else, COVID has given taste and smell a platform, and that's something that in my field it never had. We use other neurosensory systems like vision and hearing. We do, vision screening yearly on people. Taste and smell we've done nothing with before all of this. And that's wild, because take smell. Everyone has learned the importance of smell over the last 3 years with COVID, but the onset of dysfunction of smell or diminishment of smell on average predates the diagnosis of Alzheimer's, dementia by greater than 10 years. How are we not utilizing this? That's a disease that we wait until people are diagnosed and then are reactionary. If we have the ability to do something on the front end, that's one of the things I'm excited about this, because it's given taste and smell, these two neurosensory systems, kind of a platform of their importance, and now we are doing something in a real world setting. The fact that it's in wine just makes it a lot more fun, and then bourbon. So that's kind of where the future is. I'll show you, for those who have not taken it, Trey, come on up. I want to show you kind of how it works and how easy it is, because it's something I'm really proud of. Obviously, it is exceptionally complex in the background, but the point is we've done something that is just really easy to do. So if you have your phone, what it is, and you can use mine if you don't. So basically all it is, and I'll get him to do it because obviously I've taken it a ton of times and I can tell you my results out of the gate, but I want to show you kind of the process. So just open the front of it. Yep. So basically this is the little kit. It has a QR code. You scan the code on your phone, which brings up an app for you. I'm not promoting that y'all all get this, but I want to show you kind of what a tangible example of what this whole process has now turned into.
Right?
Yep, you got it. And then just scan down, it's got it.
That's it.
And you're...
All right. Oop, well, I got it. So,
Oh, that's
Can I just roll?
You can just take it and it'll show
yeah.
you.
All right. So, what do I do?
So basically it's got 4 strips of paper. He is going to, with each one of them, he places it on his tongue for about 4 to 5 seconds, and then takes it off. And on the app, you will click. His phone's giving us problems, but basically I'll walk you through how it does. Okay, so on the app, you click on what you taste, whether it be sweet, salt, bitter, sour, the primary taste, and then on a 0 to 10 scale, how strongly. And you do that for all 4 strips. At the end of the whole thing, it'll give you a chance to, to take a step back and confirm your answers based on if you want to change one based on another taste that you can. You get that chance to make a change.
I tasted something on that one, if you couldn't tell. Yeah. Okay. That's it.
So then once you hit enter, I'll show you, it will pull in, I'll give you an example of what's yours. So I'll let you do it. So you basically are going to be placed in one of 5 groups based on your expression of bitter taste receptors versus sweet receptors, and then how those correlate to wine. In his, I actually know what Trey is because, look, I've worked with several people in this room, in support of this project. And Trey, I grew up with, and so he's been my guinea pig more than just today. But basically, is this one mine or yours?
Yeah, that was yours.
So on his, I'll give you his results. Basically, it's saying that Trey would like a Washington Merlot from Columbia Valley, a Russian River Pinot Noir, whites is Pinot Grigio, Blanc Viognier. So it's very specific on the specific, or on the results designed for him. Yeah, you're good. Thank you. Strong work to Trey. And then we've worked with different retails around the country with like places like Total Wine, Ben Q here in Baton Rouge, so that you can also deliver wine to your house based on your results. It doesn't stop there. And that's my goal, is like, I'm so proud of this project from a scientific standpoint that we now have this ability to measure people and then match them and make something in everyday life applicable and easy for the general public, that we shouldn't stop there. Bourbon should be the next, working through coffee, and we have obviously great coffee companies here in Louisiana, and that's been kind of the goal, is to do it in a way so that it's something that we're all proud of here out of Louisiana. So I'll kind of wrap up and open the floor to questions. Please ask. Look, admittedly, I love this stuff. I know it's a weird thing to be obsessed with, but it is fascinating. And so any questions, fair game.
Have you guys been able to generally discern if there are differences between ethnicity, sex, those sorts of markers amongst groups of people?
Yeah, so great question. From a two answers there. The first one is, obviously, my background is completely in science, and those studies have certainly been done based on country of origin, ethnicity, gender. All of that factors in your level of expression, as does age, prior diet. So when you look at taste, it's actually incredibly complicated, and I'll try to do this in 10 seconds. But you have detection of taste, which is literally the receptors picking up some stimulant. You then have perception, which is certainly influenced by emotional state, prior experience, culture. But then you also, all of that leads to preference, okay? Now, this test actually is giving, in part, preference beyond detection, because it's measuring the receptors, but you are inputting what you taste and with what intensity. So it's beyond just the detection. But yes, to your specific question, there are certainly differences in country of origin, ethnicity, sex, age, prior diet. All of that is certainly influential in your results.
I have a question about sulfites.
Yes.
Would it detect which wines had them? I'm sensitive to sulfites.
Yeah, it's a little different thing than this test is measuring. So this test is, on the surface, what it's doing is it's measuring your specific receptors. It's not measuring wine. So that actually has been an interesting point, because ours is, I don't want to say like a middle ground product, but we're actually kind of between the two, both wine industry and the consumer. Because what we're doing is we're measuring the consumer, but then we're recommending the industry. Now, we are unbiased. We're doing it in a scientific way. But the beauty is, what we found is that like it actually is promotional of the wine industry. Obviously, it is a consumer-centric product. It is telling you specifically what is designed or is going to be best for your palate. But on the flip side, you have these wine producers who spend a ton of time and a ton of money producing a great wine. Well, in 2024, everyone has a voice on social media. And the problem with that is they can have a great wine that may go in the mouth of someone that doesn't appreciate it, and they can get a bad review. Well, that's not fair to the wine company. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the wine. Our goal is to be the middle person to match the wine so that it only goes to the person who is going to appreciate it, thereby leading to a better experience, better outcomes for the wine company, but mainly the experience that is tailored for the consumer. And so that's what I mean, kind of playing in the middle. Yes, sir.
First of all, fascinating presentation. I love
Thank
what you
you.
guys have done with matching the science to the taste preferences. But the predictive ability of this to help better manage population health, and where were you on that?
Yeah, so great question. I don't know how much I legally can say. I will say we have certainly met with, I'll say LSU and Southern University. So one of the things in medicine that is a hot topic right now is health disparities. Kind of a question that you asked, is there differences in expression based on ethnicity? One of the studies that we hope to start soon that we've worked with in Southern is the ability to predict and diminish health disparities as they relate to upper respiratory infections. And so that's one, measuring the receptors, which gives information, which is not a treatment, which I think is actually important because there have been a lot of trials that push treatments inappropriately. I'll leave it at that. But the ability to measure information and then give that information to make more informed decisions is kind of where this is headed. Yes, sir.
What about the people that say that they have lost their sense of taste of COVID?
Yeah.
Is that a myth?
No, not at all. It's actually more, so taste is influenced by COVID. Smell is more important though. The majority of when people have that symptom is that they have lost their actual sense of smell. The problem is taste is literally the detection of taste on your tongue. Sweet, salt, bitter, sour, umami. Flavor is a combination also of all of those joining together, but also retronasal smell. So what most people describe when they lose that sensation after COVID is a loss of smell, but they retain taste. Now it's diminished, and they'll say, yeah, I can still tell if something is salty or bitter, but the flavor, the enjoyment, the emotional aspect of food is often diminished. That is absolutely something that we have studied and treated and continue, and it's been part of this whole process. But that's the beauty of this, is it measures your current active expression of these receptors. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that there's a test, possibly, and is it formalized? Is it something that, I have a lot of folks that might be interested in having that test, I have a feeling. That would predict years in advance approximately some forms of dementia. Is that, how solid is that?
That is, so
that for a group of people?
I would not, well, so the problem there is, like anything in medicine, you can't come out with it until you have, in America, fortunately, until it has full FDA clearance. Because the point is, if it's not ready, it shouldn't have gone through FDA clearance, right? Yes, there are tests available. They are not fully cleared yet to utilize. They can be used on a clinical basis, and so I'm happy to sidebar you after and provide any help you need, but not a commercially available test yet. At least on that one. Wine and spirits, yes, but not on dementia. Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm out. Thank you all.